Okay, so there's surprising acclaim for The People versus O.J. Simpson. The miniseries debuted last night. It looked like it was going to be pretty campy, but it features performances from Cuba Gooding Jr., David Schwimmer, a lot of wigs and hair pieces.
They brought these actors back from the 90s.
Yes.
It's a brilliant move.
And you say campy as though it's a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is a brilliant show.
It's
I think this
amazing.
is
Let's get your thoughts first on it. What do you think of the first episode?
I just think it's a fantastic show. I think it's got a fascinating story, great performances. And it's totally current. It's just this happened over 20 years ago, but it's about police brutality. It's about narratives of race. It's also about narratives of gender and just the mess of it all. Plus about the possibility of justice in a system run by money and celebrity culture. And it just is unbelievably weirdly current. It's eerie. I mean, it's genuinely eerie, I think.
Charles, you saw the first episode. Is it as good as critics say, or are people just surprised that it's good?
I think I was pleasantly surprised. I think it's like, for the first moment that I heard this was happening, I'm like, the first question is like, why?
Right.
Why do we need to rehash certain things? And actually, after watching the first episode, I think it's brilliant. I think it couldn't have landed at a better time. The Oscars are around. There's Hollywood. There's all this. Anyway, for me, it just comes back to this idea of how we're dealing with justice and the imbalance within it.
Right.
Yeah.
Rachel, your initial thoughts?
I think it's interesting because it actually opens with live footage or like sort of recorded footage of the LA riots following the Rodney King verdict. And so that has nothing in a way to do with the O.J. Simpson trial, but of course it has everything to do with the O.J. Simpson trial. And so Ryan Murphy, who is the creator of this, who I think is such a great person to be doing this, he's responsible for Glee, for Nip and Tuck, for American the horror story, American Horror Story.
Yeah.
And so he brings this he does bring a campy sensibility to this, but the stuff he's always dealt with in his work is stuff around fame and celebrity and power and justice and race and class and gender and all of those things. And so, and the O.J. Simpson trial actually predicted so much of our stuff. So that following the white Bronco, that chase, that was like the kickoff to the CNN 24-hour news coverage. The idea of this mixture of watching the trial and weighing in on it. I mean, that was the first trial that you could actually watch day to day. And so people like Judge Ito became like characters in like late night comedy sketches. So this trial really predicted so much our modern pop culture landscape and so many things we're talking about. And it's really well done. And so, like as Steve mentioned, beautifully cast, like brilliantly cast.
As you said, so many cultural implications with the trial. As you said, racial tensions were high. This was a couple years after the Rodney King beating. Charles, what do you remember about the trial in terms of how race factored in?
Yeah, race. I remember so specifically how it was all these polarizing conversations from right within the household to coming down to like I have three older sisters, and one specific sister had this whole conversation with me about successful black men ended up with white women and what the outcome could possibly be. You know what I mean? I was really young, and I'm like, what? But then the verdict, what happened afterwards, just the conversations, a split between certain people that, it became this really, really eye-opening experience at the time to kind of find where you sit without being swayed by someone's celebrity. Finding those it's amazing how folks will find their justifications to support her, whether he was guilty or innocent, and it would just because he was a great football player, he couldn't have done it, or you know what I mean. It's a brother wouldn't do that, or like there are these things, or like he's been violent before, and there's athletes have rage, and football players specifically they lash out, and so I found it very interesting what really infused people's opinions about whether he was guilty or
well, he just became total iconography, right? Just totally removed from any kind of reality.
Well, it becomes like, isn't reality something we all agree upon?
Well, but I think that this case was so interesting because I remember at the time, and even now, when people talking about the miniseries, that this was probably like this very high-profile situation where I think white America was really shocked that black America, I know these terms are not great terms, had a different feeling about the justice system. There really was this stark sense of some people who believe, well, justice is justice and justice was served, and other people who felt like, no, the justice system is corrupt right down to the ground, and there is no way certain people can get a fair trial in this country. And so I think that was sort of, as naive as that might sound, I think that was really this. And I remember, because the trial ran during daytime, Oprah watching the verdict on her show live, and she actually felt that O.J. was guilty.
Right.
And that being a very significant thing that Oprah, so I think it was that, it's hard, you can't overemphasize how important this was in terms of the conversation that was happening in the U.S.
I remember just quickly, it was the first time I heard the word race card, I think it was.
Really?
For
that
myself.
was the first time? It might have been.
For myself, I did and be able to put that together as they're using this thing, and it's it was a very interesting place where all these terminologies, what you're saying, all these things came out of it, and I find it fascinating.
I was just a little kid at the time. I was kind of baffled by the whole thing, but looking back on it now, the thing that strikes me and the thing I still can't pull apart is how this trial is, on one hand, like a cultural punchline, and on the other hand, very serious about murder, about race, about all these things we've just been discussing. I don't know how that came to be.
Well, this was the triumph of celebrity culture, right? I mean, ultimately, all of this story is part, the racial dynamics, the gender dynamics, is really the fact that Johnny Cochran saw exactly how to play the celebrity angle perfectly. Perfectly. I mean, that is the lesson of this show, is that if you get in trouble, call Johnny Cochran because he's a genius, right? I mean, and, even in the Dream Team, he's head and shoulders above everyone else. This is the moment where celebrity culture, which forgets the facts, which has no need for physical evidence, transmits into daily lives. And it the trial became about the fact that, not just Rodney King, but I think what white America was shocked by is that you couldn't find 8 African Americans in LA who had not been hurt by the police in some incredibly unfair way. You just that was never going to happen. And that's what the narrative, that's what the trial became about, rather than who was killed.
Unfortunately, we just have time for one lightning round about the end of Twitter, potentially. The last Friday, the New Yorker announced, quote unquote, the end of Twitter. Stephen, I'll start with you. There are hundreds of millions of dedicated users. Is this thing dying?
Of course not. I mean, first of all, nothing ever dies, right? We are right now on the radio, right? Which is, which is supposed to be completely dead, right? Which was supposed to have died in, I think, 1945. So nothing ever dies. And Twitter certainly is not past its usefulness. I love it. I mean, I use it all the time. And I think what they haven't figured out is how to make a huge amount of money from it. But ultimately there will come a point where they will, and it will survive in some form. I can't imagine it just disappearing.
I think they've made some pretty good money from it.
In
considering
they don't control the whole of advertising, which seems to be what
if that's your objective, sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's what it does and for its place, I think it's absolutely fine.
Well, and I think the challenge
why is Twitter in trouble?
Well, so the piece in the New Yorker was arguing that one thing was that there's sort of management problems within Twitter, which is sort of the business side of who's running the company and what the vision is, and there's been lots of high-profile departures. The other is the challenge that Twitter has from other emerging social media sites like Snapchat and Instagram, and that Twitter seems to be, in the way that Facebook became the thing that old people did, Twitter's increasingly becoming the thing that old people do, and now the young people are on Snapchat and on Instagram and whatever. So part of it is that there's just way more options for people, and the beauty of Twitter is that it does a very specific thing very, very well. Unlike Facebook, which has managed, it lost some ground and then gained some ground by kind of placing itself as it is the internet. Eventually Facebook wants to be the place you go to instead of just going to another kind of landing page. You do everything through Facebook. So part of it is the fact that social media is evolving and that Twitter came in at a certain time and, its users are slightly older. And I think also the other thing is that Twitter has not done a great job managing its trolls.
Oh,
I was going to ask you about that.
And I think that part of it is that it's increasingly becoming the very people who sort of made Twitter powerful and potent, a lot of young people, a lot of activists, a lot of people that were sort of shut out of mainstream venues. It's becoming a much more of a toxic, abusive place for them. And Twitter has to figure that out.
It really does, because there's no reason for it. I mean, it's not like when people are being driven off your site because of being involved in debate on it, you have a real problem. When what you're selling is debate.
Exactly.
Right.
So like
Sole
it's
purpose.
and it's pretty bad.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining me here, Stephen. I love that you called out the fact that we're debating the end of Twitter on the radio. That's amazing.